The Carpenter and the Cradle, a History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 21. Finally, Goro rose to his feet. "If I may be permitted." "Yes, of course," Limo said sharply. Ko could feel the mood getting tense around the circle. Goro had challenged Limo's leadership in a thinly veiled way on more than one occasion. Ko often felt that he looked for every way possible to subtly undermine Limo and his authority in any situation. How was he planning on causing trouble on this occasion? "If we've decided he's the enemy, and I think we have, isn't there really only one penalty now that he's fallen into our hands?" "Yes," Limo said shortly. "But I suppose what we're deciding here is if we're very sure he is one of the enemy or not." Porter mumbled under his breath, but loud enough that those near him heard him. "And how can we be sure when we won't even ask him and let him tell his own tale?" "Porter!" Limo roared. "You have not been acknowledged." Porter stood and said a little grudgingly, Ko thought, "I humbly beg the pardon of the council." "Granted," Limo said in a tone that let everyone around the fire know that the form had been followed, but the pardon was anything but full and freely given. Goro was still standing and so could continue at will. "Well, I for one believe the man must be of the enemy. Isn't that more or less what's been decided? I mean, either he meant harm, physical harm, or he is a spy. I thought we'd determined that those were the only two possibilities. What other explanation could there be for his tracking Ko through the forest? I, for one, believe there is only one penalty for him. He is the enemy." A low murmuring arose among the men that Ko could tell meant the stranger's fate had been decided. And it didn't mean good news, not for the ponytailed stranger at any rate. For no real reason that he could understand, Ko's stomach shrank back within him at the thought. Wasn't this what he wanted? Revenge? Perhaps it was a reaction to the kindness, even though it wasn't real kindness, but treachery, the man had shown him earlier, or his vulnerability in asking Ko for help. But both weren't real. They were pretended. They were a trap. He must keep a grip on his emotions and keep reminding himself of the truth of the case. If the man was the enemy, and he must be, surely, as Goro had pointed out, what other explanation could there be for the man's following him through the forest? In his imagination, suddenly a deep gulf opened up in front of his feet that were about to step off it into thin air. What if the man had simply been curious? What if he was just an innocent person? What if he had followed Ko out of kindness? What if he had just wanted to make sure that Ko arrived safely to where he was going? Ko's stomach dropped into his feet for a moment, as though he was diving off the log bridge into the river below once again. Porter was right, he suddenly thought. Without talking to the man, how could they possibly know his own explanation for his behavior? But Limo was right, too. Their law made no provision for an enemy to offer his own defense. If the enemy offered a defense, it would be nothing but lies, and perhaps some would be swayed by the lies. No, it was up to the council to decide, based on the evidence they'd heard, whether or not the man was the enemy. But wouldn't we be able to tell if he was lying? Haven't we been trained how to lie to the enemy and to detect their lies? If he were to tell us the truth and he's not of the enemy, surely we'd recognize the truth from the lies, wouldn't we? Ko's traitorous thoughts jumped in to further disturb his equanimity. "Silence!" Limo thundered to quell the murmuring of the men around the fire. "Order will be maintained. If anyone has anything to say, stand and be acknowledged." "Silence!" Ko echoed the thunder at his rebellious thoughts coursing through his mind. "The council will decide, and whatever they decide will be right." The metal detector in Will's hand started to go crazy. Coral sank the blade of the spade down into the earth at the spot where the instrument had responded. "What do you think it is? Another old mattress?" she asked him in between grunts as she jumped on the upper edge of the blade with both feet. Why and how was it that Will had convinced her to be the slave labor for his explorations? "That's why we have a shovel, sister dearest, so we can find out. I don't think it'll be any garbage pile this time, not way out in the woods like this. Maybe this'll be the real deal." Will answered, squatting down to break up the clumps of dirt to sift through them. Nothing turning up so far, he muttered. Here, give it. You're too slow. Let the muscle have a turn, he grumbled. Gladly, Coral said, passing him the spade. The muscle? More like the bulk. You weigh more so you can make better progress. All kind of roots here, very hard to dig. The hole expanded more rapidly under Will's weight than it had under Coral's. Will went on digging, but every time he checked, the metal detector told him the metal was deeper still and not in the pile of loose dirt. Coral began to lose interest. For something to do, she busied herself sorting through the pile of growing dirt from Will's efforts. She looked down at her boot that was kicking its heel through a hard lump of earth that Will had just unearthed. When she'd demolished it, there was no metal there. Not unexpectedly. What do you even hope to find? She asked Will. When there was no answer, she raised her head to find that there was no Will to answer. He'd disappeared silently into the hole. In the uneven light from the torches, the men's faces looked inhuman, maybe diabolical. Coe drove the thought away that he saw an unhealthy excitement on more than one face. It was warfare, that was all. They were just doing their job. The council had decided, Limo had declared their verdict from the first seat, and now it was the council's job to carry out the penalty for spying and sabotage. The enemy had it coming to him, whatever he got. Hadn't they done it all, everything Coe's people could do, and more, to the people of Coe's village? After what Coe had been through and been lucky enough to survive, why should he have any sense of sympathy for the man being carried along on the shoulders of the assembled council members? He wouldn't have any, he angrily told himself. He must steel himself. He must be a man, a true member of the Guardians. They had important work, his people. They must do it at all costs, even if those costs were along the lines of doing things that went against the grain. What began as a low rumble among the men grew to all-out shouting as they approached Taku's place. Taku, you and Goro and Ko take Melkus and Turu and Haur and gather the materials for building, Limo commanded. Pora, you and I and Simi, Jul and Ketch will gather the flammables. Everything would be flammable, including the building material, but they knew what Limo meant. The flammables were highly flammable, small twigs and birch bark and dry grass and the like. With the number of men gathered, it didn't take long to collect and build the small hut in the middle of the dirt, a teepee of sticks, just large enough for the folded body of a grown man. The flammables were placed on hand, ready to do their work. Then Limo gave the signal to Goro, and he and Melkus dragged the man out into the darkness. Ko couldn't see anything of the man except his general dark shape. He didn't know if the expression on his face would be one of fear or anger or resignation at his fate. "Enemy stranger," Limo began in his most dread-inducing tone. And he knew how to strike fear into the heart of many a brave man just with a word. "You know your fate, and you know why you've brought it on yourself. We have judged you an enemy, and we have judged you a spy in our midst. You know what will follow." In the language of the commoners, the man said, "What am I supposed to have done?" "Silence! Prisoners are not allowed to speak!" Limo roared at the man, still using the language of the enemy, which he had learned from the former leader, when he, Limo, had been assigned as leader of their village. He now spoke it fluently, even if he used it seldom. He practiced it daily. Ko knew enough to know what he was saying to the man, but not much more. The man tried again. "You there, young man, you know me, and I know you can speak my language. Tell me what I'm accused of." Ko stood helplessly by. It was as much as his life was worth to answer the man. He didn't dare. Limo, who spoke more of the common language than Ko, would assume this attempt was just an enemy ploy, either to save his life or to buy him time. Limo would show no mercy, however. But Ko felt the panic rise in his throat. What if this was no enemy ploy? What if the man was nothing more than one of the commoners? What if he truly spoke only the common language and had no idea what was going on? It would be the stuff of nightmares to suddenly be attacked while walking through the forest for some innocent reason, and to wake up surrounded by an angry and obviously threatening crowd of men, addressed in an unknown language and unable to follow anything that was happening. And the worst was yet to come. But he couldn't think such things, Ko told himself. He couldn't let doubts crowd in. He had a job to do. And right now, that job was to stand by and watch and say nothing. The council had decided. And what the council decided was right. It had to be so. It was the only way a society like theirs could function. Questioning and doubting only created a weak society. A solid unity was the only option for an order such as theirs. They must stand together once they had made a decision. Goro and Malchus said nothing to the man, but continued to drag him when Limo raised his hand and motioned forward. The man had heard his fate. Ko told himself he understood the words, even if he pretended not to. It was done. His captors turned him so his back was to Limo. Limo raised his weapon and struck the man on the head expertly. Limo never needed to administer a second blow. The first always did the trick. The man crumpled to the ground in a shapeless heap, his hands and feet still tied tightly. It was the way of their people. The enemy would have burned him alive and conscious. Ko's people had chosen the way of the merciful. They allowed an enemy the more painless exit of the unconscious. Goro and Malchus hauled the man into the small hut. The entrance was closed off with thick logs that were placed securely. Then the flammables were laid all around it, and the pine pitch torches placed on the pyre. Then the men of the council, Ko included, walked away silently. They would not stay to watch. It was not the way of their people. And they would not speak again until morning, until the day had broken. That was the way of their people. Coral dropped to her knees, peering into the hole that had swallowed Will. "Will?" she called, a note of panic in her voice. Their excavating adventures weren't meant to end in one of them being swallowed up by the earth. What if he was seriously hurt? How far down was he? "I'm okay," Will's voice called back, muffled. At the bottom of the hole Will had been digging, Coral could see what looked like rotting wood surrounding the opening through which Will had vanished. He must have stepped onto the time-weakened wood, which wouldn't bear his weight, and fallen through into the earth below. But what sort of space was he in now? It couldn't be that far below the surface. His voice hadn't come from a long way away, and he didn't seem to have been hurt by the fall. "I'm okay," Will repeated, "but I don't think I can get myself out. The roof of this kind of room is over my head, too high to pull myself out, or even reach without jumping. You better go back and get a rope. And maybe some more muscle. I'm all right, but hurry." Coral ran for the cherry barn as fast as her feet would move.